everybody. Welcome. How you doing? Well, after that talk, we're going to talk about human rights. And, this is a very, very tough concept, but it's something that can be easily solved through technology. We've got Richie Etwaru here, co-founder and president, CEO of Hu-manity.co. And I'm going to ask you a very important question. How do you go about building a human right?
Well, it's difficult. The most important thing for us is when we looked at really big agreements that human beings have had, whether it's the 10 Commandments or the human rights, is that they're built in two ways. They're built top-down, and they tend to look back at the potholes of history and solve them. And so what we did was we built a framework to make sure that we could build human rights bottom-up, meaning starting from the contract level and the compliance
by the
level.
people, from the people.
And instead of it looking back at history and trying to fix one of the humanitarian issues of history, we looked forward and saw a humanitarian issue that we wanted to address, which is we don't have a global agreement around who owns inherent human data and how it should be treated. And we thought of it as a humanitarian issue, right? The line of what a humanitarian issue is and is not has changed over time. And we believe that we are about to see the world's first digital humanitarian issue around the use of data. And we declared, a 31st human right around it. And that is, that takes a lot of bravery because you're not the United Nations, right? But if you think about the matter, it's hard to debate that it's not a human right. Today, whether you're old, young, rich, poor, red, or blue, the matter of who owns your data and whether you should have choice control or compensation for it, it affects you.
But you're doing something very important. We're at a critical juncture in history, right? Over half of the world will be connected to the internet, and you're doing this not from hindsight. You're thinking about this from foresight as to what it means, human rights in a digital era.
Yep, and it means that it's not something that's given to you. It's something that you can take. And I think that's very different when we think about all the global agreements that we have as a civilization.
Now, lots of conversations about roles of technology and how they play in this. And you're using a small part of this, but why is blockchain a part of the solution?
Well, I think, it's interesting that Tim mentioned, sort of the crystallized view of the internet, which is it compresses distance. I think it's important for us to understand that blockchain helps us, or might help us. I don't want to be over-sensationalized here, but blockchain helps us solve for one of the fundamental manufacturing flaws of our species, which is we are not good at agreeing on things. Like if I asked everyone in the room today and watching to agree on just 3 movies that everybody likes, it'll probably take, with this room, with this intellectual horsepower, 2 months.
2 months.
Right? So we're just not good at agreements, and what blockchain allows us to do is it allows us to manufacture agreements between large networks of nodes, okay? The internet was won by killer apps. Blockchain is probably going to be won by killer agreements. And in this world where we don't have a clear answer on who owns data, by country, age by age, color by color, company by company, it's such a heterogeneous mess that we needed at the core of it something that allows us to represent immutable agreement, the legal artifacts behind it, and the type of metadata that will facilitate that into a commercial structure or a human structure. So we're using it for agreement, and that's why we're doing it here. What's important also to note is that blockchain has been used to get agreement around currency. Right? Prior to blockchain, only certain centralized authorities can tell you what a currency is. Here's 200 million people saying Bitcoin's a currency. That was taking something that was already agreed to and using blockchain to have a different agreement on it. We're taking something that we don't have an agreement to, which is how you own your data, and adding agreement to it. So I wouldn't say blockchain is the star of the show, but it's certainly one of the key players in it.
And the smart contract aspect of it is what you're talking about.
Yeah, when you want to facilitate the commerce that goes on top of the data.
Now, this means you're looking at inherent personal data as something different, right? Why is property then integrated into this whole notion of My31?
So property is the operating model of our civilization, right? It's one of the oldest constructs that we understand. What's interesting as well is property is one of the most innate things that we understand. Like, my 1-year-old understands property already, and he doesn't even have language, right? He'll climb over a toddler twice his size to get his favorite truck, right? And most of the work that has been going on, we have work around privacy, right? And there's people leading that. I think Benioff is leading some of that narrative, right? There's work around possession. I think the work that Tim is doing around Solid is good in the area of possession. There's work around permissions. I think, I don't know if Doc Searles is in the room or not.
Yes,
He's
he
doing
is.
a lot of
Right
work
there.
around
Look at that.
permissions, right? And then there's work around policy, which around fair trade data. Property is sort of the tent, right? That all of these efforts can find a place and a name and a narrative to work with. And what's really important is that the way we're applying property to human data is not around a negative freedom. A lot of us think about negative freedoms, we don't think about positive freedoms, right? So a lot of the debate is like, you can't touch my data, you can't have my data, you can't see my data. Those are negative freedoms. Property is a positive freedom. It's my data is my property. And that's very, very, very different. As we retrofit property for data, it's important that we understand that we already have a trade infrastructure in place. The concept of lease, the concept of passing it off to your estate, the concept of negotiating fair trade value. If you donate your property, you get a tax write-off for it. We had an interesting conversation with some powers to be in the country around taxation, because data is non-rival, right? So you could donate it multiple times. So that means you get multiple tax write-offs to it, and that's not a good thing, right? For the government, at least. So property is sort of that place, that call to action that brings all of these disparate efforts over decades onto one tent.
And property is also localized. The laws are written in a way that are custom to those places, so you don't have to rewrite tort law or anything like that.
There's an existing known infrastructure that we can leverage in order to do this. We don't have to build it from the ground up.
All right, but this means a lot of people are going to get disrupted here. And there are going to be a lot of angry people, so.
It's kind of funny. Every time I hear the word disruption, I chuckle. It's a very Silicon Valley construct, right? I don't think Silicon Valley realizes that GDP moves more than inflation. And the fact that GDP moves higher than inflation, it means that there are blue ocean strategies being built every day. We've taken a blue ocean strategy to make sure that both the consumers, the corporations, and governments can benefit. So we don't collect the data, we're track and trace for data, right? We mark the data with property rights on the beginning of the supply chain with the human beings, and then we allow the end of the supply chain to use the title ID as a unique identifier to see the settings of those individuals. So we're putting a layer of transparency and track and trace over a data black market, right? I don't see us as in the business of disruption. I see us as in the business of course-correcting the future.
So my personal data gets a property right, a title that I can lease to someone?
Yeah, like you have a title for your car and a title for your house.
I can lease it, I can give it away, I can make money on it.
We collect your leasing preferences. Not everybody wants to make money from their data.
Maybe I don't want you to touch my data. I'm a pretty private individual.
We allow consumers to say they want to be out of the market. They can be in the market for good only. So maybe you only want your data used for good. Or your data is being used right now. You can set preferences around it. And those preferences could include monetization and income. And that's why I say we're in the course correction business, because the two biggest things that worry me are the unemployable class that we will have, and sort of the absence of digital peace, right? And it's important that we understand that our data is increasingly being used to automate the jobs that we have, which will take us to an unemployable class, which essentially leaves us with universal basic income. We see data as universal passive income. And the thing that bothers me the most, I don't burden my team with this bother, but I don't believe that we're a species that has been engineered for peace. I happen to be a student of 2 history professors, and we're not good at peace. And I think World War III is going to be digital. I think it's going to be fought with hackers, and it's going to be fought with programmers, and it's going to be fought around our data. And so we need to get into a mindset around treaties and sanctions and conflict as we think about this new strategic natural resource.
Wow, this is deep. All right, so what surprises are you seeing? Where are we headed here? What's going to change? Where do we summon the courage for all this?
I think, anytime you want change, it's important to think about the rate of syndication. The rate of syndication of this idea is fantastic, right? Like, people are just catching on to it and telling others about it. That's beating our expectations. And also the perspective of rejection. There's a couple of people who reject this idea. They're usually really, really smart and have multiple Ivy League degrees. Other than that, this idea is massively, massively accepted. The surprises that I'm seeing are in the, I didn't mean that to be disrespectful, it's just a fact, I'm sorry. We're seeing some interesting surprises. So one is just talent. Like, we've been able to attract just a collection of mutants around this idea to drive the business. The receptiveness of policymakers, Michael DePalma, my co-founders in the room, has been advising lawmakers all across the country, legislators who are interested in passing laws to classify human data as human property. We're picking up a lot of courage agents. You know, I've spent the last 10 years talking about change agents. This stuff requires courage. We've been picking up courage agents in organizations who their pockets are lined with the current sort of state that are willing to do this. But I think what's really, really promising is the role of academia. We've been working with 5 academic institutions across the country right now to implement things like fair trade data in the curriculum and data ethics in the curriculum. A lot of talk about data science. We're at the intersection of 2 agreements. We're at the intersection of something that's right and something that should be a right. And humans owning their data is right. And most people agree that that should be a right. It should be a positive freedom, not a negative freedom.
Wow. All right, so a lot of work ahead. This isn't an easy task. You got policymakers to convince. You got to get tech on board. You got to get consumers riled up and excited about this. You got to create an ecosystem. What challenges do you see ahead?
Well, I think the first thing is that people always ask me, like, why wouldn't Facebook and Google do this, right? And I think that's a pretty low IQ question. But I think it's important to look at data sets that come off the human body not as a single brush, right? There's different data sets. We did a piece of study where we plotted the data sets that come off the human body on a Pareto chart. And on the left side of that chart are the things that are not that valuable to you. Like, they can't pay your Netflix bill if you were going to be paid for it. And on the left side of those charts are the data sets that are really, really valuable to you, right?
Give us an example.
Yeah. So on the right side of that chart is like your Facebook status and your Google, like communication. Not that valuable, yes, in mass amounts, yes. But the interesting thing is that the contract that you're in with Facebook and Google is one where you're getting a service back for free, right? With Facebook, you're getting a platform to perpetuate your vanity. With Google, I probably shouldn't say that, there are Googlers in the room. But on the left side of that chart are things like your healthcare data, which is super valuable. It could earn you income that'll pay your Netflix bill. But here's the interesting thing. This is a byproduct of a transaction that you paid for. You paid the doctor, you paid the pharmacy, you paid the labs. It's a byproduct of a transaction that you paid for that's being monetized by a company that you're not even in contract with. These are the software companies behind the scene. So that's a challenge, just getting the public to understand that that's not it.
So
right?
I paid 4 times for a service that they're profiting off of it?
Yeah, in healthcare, it's interesting. And I mean, I don't want to get into healthcare data, but EMR and EHR companies are doing that. There's 2 other things that I worry about. There's an argument around the commons, right? The benefit of the commons, like data helps the commons.
I'm a public health major.
And yeah, but this argument has been brought up in the 1600s around intellectual property. When we argued for the commons, which is where we got the starving artists, like people who wrote books. The argument was, we can't pay you because we need to educate the masses, right? Same thing with slavery, right? There was an argument for the commons, right? Plantation owners argued, how are we going to build bridges and churches and roads when we have to pay for labor? It's not a good argument to not give people personal agency over what they have. And my last worry is a moral compass, right? What we're embarking on is, like I said, courageous. And it requires a fair amount of bravery. And we want to make sure that we figure out how to build a longitudinal moral compass, right? The folks who were on stage earlier this morning that invented the internet, they couldn't foresee what they have, what we're facing today. They would have had to have been superhuman to foresee what we're dealing with today 30, 40 years ago. I want to make sure that we're engineering something that could withstand the test of time. Those are sort of the challenges that I see in front of me.
They were superhuman in creating the technology, but it's the impacts of technology which we've been talking about today. And those are the policy implications here. So is this a movement? Will this be a movement? Where are we headed with this?
Well, we're certainly building a movement. We call it the My 31 movement, obviously, around the first decentralized human right being built in the world. Movements require two things. They require the Goldilocks conditions for change, and they require a counter-narrative that people are looking for.
So not too much, not too much.
Goldilocks, right? So the Goldilocks conditions for change that we see right now is, one is, this entire deal is an improper fraction. Right? And by the way, like, I'm a child of an indentured servant, so I could say this. Like, at one point, slavery was a good deal. Like, for my great-great-grandparents, being poor and have nothing, like 3 beatings a day and a meal, not that bad, right? But it becomes an improper fraction eventually, and that's the forced Goldilocks conditions that we're seeing. Second is, there has to be a solution that satisfies the needs of the consumers, corporations, and governments. And property does that, because governments can tax property, by the way. Let's not talk about eminent domain on property, because that's one of the things we have to sort out. And the third is that public opinion is boiling over, right? And the fact that public opinion is boiling over, we think we have this. There's some other conditions around it. The notion of data as property actually helps to normalize some of the variation that we see in wealth. Right? So wealth that was created from salt or from oil, everybody has data, and everybody's data sort of has that property. We are the official sort of digital property rights management company for the country of Liberia.
Wow.
So we signed a deal with the country of Liberia, and it's interesting, you know, the leaders of the incoming leadership of the country looked at it and said, I don't want my citizens to come online the way you guys came online with an AOL CD and a user's license agreement that didn't protect you. Right? I want them to have this built into the user's license agreement today. So I think it's remarks like that that encourage us, or provides the encouragement that we need to know that this will turn into a movement. The other thing, man, is the size of the human data marketplace. It's about $200 billion today. And we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. This thing is expanding in exponential ways, and the value is expanding in exponential ways. And I've had these conversations before, like, you know, what about the other humanitarian issues? What about human trafficking, right? Well, that's important, but that problem is constricting over time. This problem in the future is expanding over time.
Exponentially.
And so when we think about how we solve these types of massive, historic, socioeconomic constructs, we have to solve it at the right point in the stack. Right? You have to start, like, well, listen, we can't build an 11th commandment, right? Like, everybody would laugh, right? Nobody laughed in here. Wow, maybe we should do that. Like, what's bigger than the 31st?
What's bigger than the 31st?
Right? The 11th commandment, right?
Let's all do that at once. What's bigger than the? No,
So that's kind of where we are, and this is one of those things that, you know, you really need to think about history when you sort this out. Right?
So where are we? How can we help in this larger context? I mean, we've got live streamers around the world. We've got millions of folks looking at this. I mean, this is a problem people are trying to solve. Do we need like a new Magna Carta, maybe?
Well, nice setup, Ray. We launched a data-focused Magna Carta this morning. And there's a couple of people in the
I saw that, that's why.
that helped put that together, and the team did a fantastic job. And the data-focused Magna Carta has a basic slogan inside of it, which is, my data is my property. And I know, by the way, that's like grammatically incorrect. It should be, my datum is my property. But every time you say my data are my property to people, it freaks them out. Okay? But the slogan is, my data is my property. And all big socioeconomic historic changes, they require a slogan. They have to have a slogan. You know, we remember, you know, Yes We Can and Make America Great Again, right? And they could be used for good and bad, depending on whether you're red or blue here. But we have a slogan, which is, my data is my property. And that counter-narrative is so important, because when society is atomized, right? When we atomize society, and our civic fabric is strange, in the absence of a strong and compelling counter-narrative, demagoguery will continue to exist unmolested. And I'm in the business of molesting demagoguery. Right? So part of how we can help is to be able to amplify that counter-narrative. Right? You cannot replace the story in 7 billion people's heads without giving them a counter-narrative story.
Yes.
Right? The other way to help is to really think about the measurement of this. We believe that at some point we should get to the equivalent of the Kyoto Protocol around the use of data. And I think everyone here is in organizations where you have to start to measure How are you applying data ethics? Are you complying with fair trade data? And last but not least, I think you should tell someone else about the app.
So a new means of corporate social responsibility is the data aspect.
Absolutely. You know, the next differentiator of economic periods is trust and transparency, right? So when my parents grew up, it was price and quality, right? We're living in the experience and engagement economic period where the way to differentiate is everybody got to feel awesome about what you buy, whether it's Snapple or not, right? We're moving to an economic period where the key differentiator is going to be trust and transparency. And one of the fundamental tenets of how you differentiate as a company from your competition is going to be your posture on the ownership of human data. So we think that eventually we should see, you know, agreements around things like the Kyoto Protocol for data. Maybe we'll just call it the Kyoto Protocol for data. And the last thing is, you know, I know a lot of people, we have 3,000 people in a beta right now as we continue to think through the complexities here, is to find us more courage ambassadors. We're looking for courage ambassadors in countries, in regions, in industries, and we would like more people to join.
How would I look for you on the app?
Google Play or Apple App Store, you search for #My31, find the app, go through the process, get the legal documents that are necessary in the app. It's very simple to use. That allows you to claim your data as your property, get a title, set your preferences, and we'll start negotiating on your behalf.
All right, humanitarians, Richie Etwaru. We're out of here.